Once upon a time, there lived a very ordinary girl. She had an ordinary personality, she had ordinary grades, and she was pretty, in an ordinary way. In other words, she lived every single day like any other normal girl. One day, she went to the local priest for confession. The girl told him that she was in love with a beautiful prince, but she knew that someone like him would never fall for someone like her. Yet the priest told her that there was one way. The ordinary girl had to revolutionize the world. This ring will help you use your prince's sword, the priest told her. With the power of her love, she could take back what she wanted from those who held her back. But what would that really change?
The middle arc of the Revolutionary Girl Utena anime is known as the Black Rose Saga. Fans of the anime know this arc for its darker tone, its rather confusing main plot, and how it pushes side characters into the forefront of the narrative. Siblings, friends, fiancés, and other nobodies of the main cast take up their sword to challenge Utena and kill the Rose Bride. Among these side characters turned duelists is Wakaba Shinohara. She's Utena's best friend. Aside from Anthy, of course. In the episode Wakaba Flourishing, Wakaba challenges Utena to a duel. But of course, she doesn't win. I mean, if a Black Rose duelist actually won, they would have killed Anthy, and the series wasn't about to let that happen. But I felt for a long time that if it was going to happen, if a duelist were to kill Anthy, Wakaba would have been the one to get the job done. Which raises a question. What would have happened if Wakaba had killed Anthy? The short answer is, of course, whatever Yoji Enikido and Kunihiko Ikahara would have wanted to have happen, as they were the main ones writing the series. But the long answer I find to be much more fun, because it lets us entertain some hypotheticals. So, let us go then, you and I, when the night is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. For to uncover the answers we seek, we must go deeper. Much deeper.
Upon the Black Rose, I swear, Wakaba Shinohara brandished her sword. Her sword. The sword drawn from her prince, Kyoichi Saionji. Miss Utena. Utena Tenjo stood with shattered poise, gaping mouth, her wide eyes drawn to her friend, and now tragic opponent. I shall win this duel. Wakaba wore markings of a Black Rose duelist. The Black Rose pinned to her chest, and the cursed crest ring around her finger. Take the sword from me, Anthy called out. But the words were lost on Utena, who could not think about anything other than Wakaba's sudden betrayal. And kill the Rose Bride!
So, the brief skinny of what we can confirm with our own eyeballs is that after Utena beat every single member of the student council in a duel, some dude named Soji Mikage started to crank out new, so-called Black Rose duelists. Mikage preyed upon students who were racked with doubt or pain by luring them inside of an elevator and having them confess to him their deepest anxieties. But instead of helping them manage or resolve their frustrations in any healthy way, Mikage would do as Beyoncé urges and put a ring on it. Their finger, that is. In other words, Mikage is an apple that fell not too far from the tree that is Akio, in that they're both manipulators and users. These kids were already desperate, and Mikage pushed them over the edge. They started to act with a new sense of purpose, which I suppose could indicate that they are being controlled by Mikage, or like the ring itself is mind controlling them. But honestly, I think it's much more likely that the ring was simply lowering their inhibitions. They already had the side of them in them, but the ring had set their ruthlessness free and let it go unrestrained. Goodbye superego, goodbye conscience. With the exception of the first Black Rose duelist, Kanae, all of the others make an important pit stop after Mikage's basement of coffins. going next to the location of the person they loved who has caused them so much pain. Kozue goes to Miki, Shiori goes to Juri, Wakaba goes to Saionji, Mitsuru goes to Nanami, and Keiko goes to Toga. The Black Rose duelist then extracts from this person their sword, similar to how Utena would draw the Sword of Dios from Anthy. Here's what I'm thinking. The Sword of Dios represents Anthy's connection to Dios, hence why the sword has that name, hence why Anthy has that invocation as she draws the sword, and the lights happen, and blah 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 blah. This is also why it's important in the last arc of the series that Utena is no longer using the Sword of Dios. Instead, Utena is using a new sword that represents Anthy's bond with Utena. And admittedly, the duels in Utena really don't make that much logical sense. I mean, Utena beats the school kendo captain with a broken stick. But I wager it's more interesting to think of the duels more as metaphors, or think of them on a thematic level. It's a fight between opposing wills and opposing relationships. The duels are more of a test of Anthy's devotion to Akio. And as time goes on and there's a different sword, her bond with Utena. But when the Black Rose duelist draws out their swords, it hurts the other person. It's like the person from whom the sword is being extracted is now feeling in one huge wave the pain of the Black Rose duelist, who for so long had quietly suffered in silence under their one-sided relationship. And there's also sexual undertones to many of these scenes, which would implicate the Black Rose duelist in potentially violating the other person emotionally as well as physically. Let's look at a quick and relatively easy example. Kozue visits Mikage to vent her frustrations about her brother Miki. She is upset because she and Miki used to be so close when they were children. But now they are distant, and their relationship is strained. Kozue is so desperate for her brother's attention that she'll purposefully upset him and draw his disdain, such as when she fools around with boys just so Miki will notice her actions. Mikage is then able to draw out all of Kozue's anger and jealousy and all the layers of sadness, and at that point, she's ready to fight. Furthermore, Kozue is a good example because she already has reason to kill the Rose Bride. After all, Anthy is the one who Miki is now looking at instead of his sister. If Anthy were removed from the picture, Miki's biggest distraction would be gone, and all eyes would be on Kozue. It's interesting to note that Wakaba also has reason to kill the Rose Bride. That would free up Saionji and Utena's attention, and it might earn Wakaba a best friend and a boyfriend. The double-edged sword, pun intended, is that the weapon created by these Black Rose duelists, like Kozue, it is based on a weak bond, and for the very reason that could be strong, it's also pretty weak. Sure, Kozue has intense feelings about Miki, and those feelings give her an aggressive advantage. But a bond with that kind of foundation is rather weak and actually self-sabotaging. It's clear why that wouldn't stand a chance against Utena wielding the Sword of Dios. In order for a Black Rose duelist to win, they would have to meet at least one of a few conditions. Their bond would have to create a sword stronger than the Sword of Dios, or else they would have to somehow severely shake the resolve of either Utena or Anthy during the fight itself. And of all the Black Rose duelists, there's only really one that I think could do something like that.
Take it now! Wakaba heard a tremor of fear in Anthy's call to take the sword, and it disgusted her. She knew better now. Wakaba knew the Rose Bride was a lifeless doll. Any emotions she showed were fake, like the fake smile she wore, even as she tortured poor Saionji. Now, she had the nerve to act like she was some kind of damsel in distress. Anthy. Utena shut out reality by closing her eyes. I can't fight her. I can't use the sword against a friend. Against Wakaba. Wakaba darted forward and ran swiftly across the duelist arena floor. The sword in her hand, her sword, Saionji's sword, drew forth from Wakaba the courage she had repressed for years. Take the sword! Anthy's fearful tone renewed. No! That's right. I'm gonna kill her! Wakaba smiled. The girl who stole my Saionji from me! Utena finally stepped forward to protect her bride, but she shielded her with only her body, no weapon in hand. Saionji? Wakaba's smile died. Utena claimed to be her best friend, but she didn't realize? All those moments of pity and sincerity. How could this imposter have ever been an idol in her eyes? Utena boasted friendship, but never looked at her as an equal. Wakaba's motions flowed with ease as the sword guided her. She made an upward thrust towards Anthy's head. Utena had enough self-preservation in her to jump away at the last moment. What happened? Wakaba, you were shining so brightly. What happened? Shining? What right did she? You wouldn't understand. Wakaba's words exploded. You'll never understand! Anthy looked desperately at Utena. Hurry! Hurry! The sword! Wakaba cleared her way past Utena and shoved Anthy to the ground. So little force was required. What a frail body. What a hollow husk, pretending to be something real. Utena stepped in front of Anthy again, using her body as a pleading shield. Wakaba made an upward slash with her sword. If she relented now, she would never. Stop it, Wakaba! Utena's eyes welled up with tears. Stop it! Wakaba! Utena fell between the desks, but Wakaba immediately yanked her back up by her hair. Miss Utena! Wakaba's eyes darted from Utena in her grasp to Anthy, then back to Utena. Wakaba drew her sword up against Utena's neck. You and that girl and the Stone Council too! Wakaba didn't mask her venom. This time Utena had to listen and realize her feelings. You all look down on me! As she felt the cold steel of the Black Rose duelist blade against her neck, Utena perspired and looked at Wakaba with dreading non-comprehension. Without a care in the world, you used the special gifts you were born with. Wakaba continued, and with each word she breathed into being, she felt her conviction solidify. And without a second thought, Miss Utena! You trample the rest of us!
In Utena, it's not really easy to compare the power level of the bonds. Like, theoretically, Keiko should have a very weak bond with Toga, since Keiko isn't even a blip on Toga's radar, let alone the viewers. But if Keiko's one-sided feelings are intense enough, like, hypothetically, does that make up for it? How do you even compare Mitsuru's complex feelings toward Nanami to Shiori's also complex feelings toward Juri? I mean, good luck if you want to try. But I am going to make a case specifically for the potential strength of Wakaba's bond with Saionji. Sure, Saionji at first didn't notice Wakaba existed any more than Toga ever realized Keiko's presence. But when Saionji did notice Wakaba, they shared a very wholesome period of time together, and it meant the world to Wakaba. I would argue that Wakaba's pain would be stronger than Keiko's, because Wakaba got a taste of what it was like to be loved by that out-of-reach person, and right when she was getting comfortable, it was quickly snatched away from her. Meanwhile, Shiori hasn't been close to Juri ever since their love triangle shenanigans years ago. Kozue's bond with Miki has had about a decade to cool off. But Wakaba's pain is fresh and raw and hasn't allowed for any time to heal wounds. Mitsuru's feelings were very confused when it came to Nanami, and his mixed feelings weren't even all about her. They were largely stemming from his anxieties about being a kid and being treated like a kid, and just wanting to finally grow up. Wakaba doesn't have that split in her focus. All of that said, I don't think the sword Wakaba drew from Saionji would have been stronger than the sword of Dios. And Wakaba, like the other Black Rose duelists, is not trained in fencing, kendo, or any fighting style. Wakaba wasn't going to win by strength or combat prowess alone. Rather, Wakaba had the best chance out of anyone because she actually had a connection to Utena. And this is a glaring difference to me. Utena met Kozue for like 5 minutes. She'd only seen Shiori and Keiko, but never really talked to them. And Mitsuru, I guess she knew passively at best? I've mainly been avoiding Kanae because her situation is so different from everyone else's. But it's not like Kane had time to form a bond with Utena either. But Wakaba was legitimately close to Utena, and I think those personal stakes nearly cost Utena the duel. Anthy sounded actually worried in this fight, and for all the fights that happen in Utena, this is not a reaction we usually get from Anthy. Utena almost didn't draw the Sword of Dios. Utena hesitated to strike out at Wakaba, but Wakaba, she didn't have that kind of restraint holding her back. Her bond with Saionji might not have been enough on its own to give her an advantage, but her bond with Utena gave her opponent a disadvantage. It nearly cost Utena everything, including Anthy.
Wakaba! Utena took a deep breath and looked down. I know there's a lot about this I don't understand, but there's one thing I'm sure of. Utena looked straight back up at Wakaba. You're one of my closest friends. Hold on. I'm going to save you. Save me. Those words unlocked something in Wakaba. Utena had been spinning her around and was trying to loosen the grip she had over her sword, Saionji's sword. Not now. This was the moment. I have been powerless all my life. Wakaba's voice was resolute and froze Utena, Anthy, and everything around them into silence. And now? You want to take that power away from me? Wakaba tightened her grip around the sword, treating it with the importance she now realized it carried. For the first time in my life, I have some real power, and now you want to take it away? Let me have this! Don't you realize, Utena? To be normal is to be powerless. Wakaba spun herself back around and crashed her right knee into Utena's stomach. Utena involuntarily lurched forward, and in that moment, Wakaba held her own sword in one hand while using her other hand to pry Utena's from her. Wakaba rushed past Utena and, as she advanced to Anthy, scraped both blades against the floor of the duelist arena. Saionji's black rose sword drawn in her left hand, Anthy's own sword of Dios drawn in her right. Sparks of pink and black danced in the blade's trails. For all of us who are normal, this is our revolution! Wakaba plunged both blades into Anthy Himamiya at once. Anthy gasped and looked up at the floating upside-down castle. She whispered some words in silence. A prayer? A curse? And that is why. Wakaba drove the blades further into Anthy until they slid into her up to the hilt, and Wakaba could lean her face right up to hers. The Rose Bride must die if normal girls are going to be free. Anthy continued to strain upward toward the castle. Utena rushed toward them with open arms, disarmed, a sobbing wreck. Anthy, no. Anthy, no, not. Wakaba closed her eyes. She breathed in the peace of the moment, and at once sliced Anthy open with both blades. Anthy cried out like a siren, like a harpy. A shrill, tortured cry that finally released the building pain the Rose Bride had accumulated inside for years. The pain had nowhere to go until now. Now it burst forth from the hole in the middle of her. The cry lingered in the air, even after Anthy's body dissolved into rose petals that scattered in the wind.
I don't think any scenario in which a Black Rose duelist wins could yield a happy ending. I don't even think a Black Rose duelist would physically actually kill Anthy. Anthy would play dead, and she'd put on a good show, but once the smoke cleared, she'd sneak away with her life intact. It's not like Anthy isn't used to being stabbed by swords, but it's not just that. The Black Rose duelists are powered by a distorted bond, so I would expect that their revolution would also turn out distorted. That said, Utena is a show that challenges the ideas of nobility and princes. Everything that seems good has a dark side. As the poet Axl Rose once said, "Every rose has its thorn." And the inverse is probable. Even the distorted Black Rose victory would probably have some good aspects too. Wakaba's revolution would probably entail equaling the playing field between the special elites at the top and the average people who feel trampled on below. Those in power would be brought to their knees, and the masses would rise up to claim the spoils. I don't think we need to bring out the guillotines for this one, though. With Anthy and Mamiya out of the picture, the entire dueling game would change, and I think the student council would immediately lose power. Toga was already in a nearly catatonic state during the Black Rose arc. Miki and Saionji, more on him later, would both be devastated by Anthy's apparent death. They would likely withdraw from the council, or at the very least, emotionally withdraw and lose their will to fight. That just leaves Juri and Nanami as the best candidates to keep the old order intact. But I honestly suspect that End of the World would just dispose of them quickly, because Utena had already failed her test, and now it would be time to scrap the whole student council End of the World plan altogether. The students would surely notice the council's collapse, and at first they might pity their fallen heroes. Then they might become disillusioned by the council's weakness, and gradually begin to wonder why they ever worshipped these false idols in the first place. All of the fanboys and fangirls of Toga, Saionji, Juri, Miki, and Utena, they'd realize that their stars didn't shine so bright after all. At first, this might help a few students become more self-reliant and less hero-worshipy, but it's also likely that in this power vacuum, new students would rise up to take their place, and the cycle of idolizing elites would begin again. Anthy's apparent death would result in Mamiya taking over, because it's heavily implied, if not outright confirmed, that Anthy had been transforming into Mamiya all throughout the Black Rose arc, in order to manipulate this unstable Mikage into preparing all the Black Rose duelists. This had all been Akio's way of challenging Utena, with what would appear as an outside threat, but it was always part of the plan. Since Akio knew what Mikage was doing and was in fact the puppet master behind it all, it's safe to say that Akio and Anthy both knew the risks if a Black Rose duelist won. They were never in any real physical danger. If Anthy was killed by a Black Rose duelist, I think it would set in motion a sort of plan B, where Mamiya would become the new Rose Bride in her place. Akio would stand to lose very little, but the real Anthy might actually be lost forever. She was so close to having a genuine friend in Utena, so close to having a hope for a better future. But now she would lose not only her relationship with Utena, but her own identity. Anthy would slip into this form of Mamiya, and whatever there was of the real Anthy would withdraw further into darkness. And now that he's done with her, Mikage would turn against Wakaba and try to take the new Rose Bride Mamiya, as well as the power to revolutionize the world. And even if Wakaba is able to defeat Mikage, the power of Dios would go unchallenged and remain under a false sense of peace. Despite all of this, a good ending could still be salvaged, but it would only be possible if Wakaba is able to notice that Anthy had never been the real problem. Yes, Anthy had been a manipulator, but Anthy was also a victim of the same person behind these cycles of manipulation and behind this patriarchal stranglehold. Wakaba would need to see that the real threat was never Anthy, but it was Akio, and what Akio represents as a prince. But the whole reason that Utena's revolution was a success in the series is because her final act was showing compassion and love for Anthy. Utena's revolution was one of unflinching love and trust, and in her Black Rose form, I don't think Wakaba could do that. If she stabs Anthy, there's no turning back. While wearing the Black Rose ring, Wakaba wouldn't be capable of that kind of redemptive bond with anyone, not even with her dear Saionji. Black Rose Wakaba would want to possess him and never let go. And I think Akio and Mamiya would be more than happy to just let her have him, in order to pacify her. If Wakaba were to be free of the ring, it wouldn't matter. She'd either lose her memories and her power, or she would keep the memories and be utterly destroyed by the guilt over her actions. At least with the ring, she could live a happy lie and have her prince for all eternity. Over time, she might even be able to manipulate Saionji just enough for him to feel something like love for her. They could be together forever, nestled close in their single coffin, while outside, Akio would go unchallenged, and Wakaba's once bright revolution would subside to a whimpering, cold, lost opportunity. I went back and forth on whether to make this video because I was worried that there might not be a clear point to it. But I obviously decided to move forward with it anyway, and I did that for two reasons. First, I think speculation like this is honestly fun. I enjoy making these kind of videos, and I think it's useful even if there isn't a singular, obvious takeaway at the end. It's good to play with hypotheticals and stretch the limits of their fiction a little bit, whether that results in fan fiction, concepts for fan art, or videos like this. I make these kind of videos because I love Utena. Second, I do have something of a conclusion to offer here. I think that if Wakaba won, we would have seen Ikehara and the B-Papa's team behind Utena address how a surface-level regime change doesn't necessarily fix issues within a systemic power structure. I think Wakaba is doomed to be a failed hero because of her motivations. And I find Wakaba very sympathetic. I want to root for her. I think Utena consistently does not take Wakaba's feelings as seriously as she should. And I want to root for the underdog against all these elite duelists and the special people. But the anime consistently warns against self-serving princes. And much as I would like to see Wakaba thrive and have a happy ending, I think Wakaba in her state of mind as a Black Rose duelist would have wanted to possess Saionji and not really change anything for anyone else. Her quick, fiery would-be revolution would be ineffective if the underlying problems aren't rooted out. I'm ultimately glad that the anime did decide to go with the ending it has, the more personal idea of revolution that Utena and Anthy have in their plotline. The real revolution is to fight with a pure heart for others, not to use them or try to possess them, but to trust in your friends even if they quite literally stab you in the back. Utena is a very naive character. It leads her to make some bad decisions sometimes. But I think that the show and Ikehara and Enikido also side with that naivety. And it's hard for me to imagine a better ending to Utena than what the anime has already given us. Hey, thank you for watching. We're doing an Utena analysis series on this channel that you might be interested in while you're here. The first episode is on the B-Papa's team and overall scope of Utena, and every episode after will focus on a different main character. I also have a side channel called Khalil Ranks, where I've ranked Utena characters, episodes, and ships, and I might return to that channel sometime. Links are in the description. And I know it's standard to invite discussion in the comments because obviously that helps me out when you add to the engagement, but I legitimately, honestly, truly would enjoy reading your thoughts on what might have happened if Wakaba had won, if there's anything I touched on in the video you just had some thoughts on. Maybe there's someone else in Utena you think also had a chance, and what would have happened if they had won? There's a lot of fun possibilities I would just love to hear your thoughts on in the comments. And that's all I got for right now. Until next time, ciao.